In the 1860s, a hired hitman tracked down a horse thief in the mining town of Aurora, Nevada. This seemingly innocuous event led to the entire town being taken over by a group of outlaws. In the end, it takes a vigilante crew of over 100 men to take their town back. This is the story of a notorious group of outlaws that for the most part has been lost to time, but shouldn't be. This is the story of the Daly gang. In April 1863, a man named James Sears was traveling by foot down the Esmeralda Road, heading towards Aurora. As luck would have it, at Johnson Station, James Sears would come upon a saddled horse that was completely unattended. He was tired, he was beat down, he had been traveling a long distance, and it was like a miracle that this saddled horse was just sitting there right in front of him. So what was he to do other than hop on this horse and go for a ride? However, inside the station was a man named Lewis Wedderts, and it was his horse. Lewis was inside, he heard the commotion, he looked outside, he saw James jumping on his horse and taking off. He came outside just in time to watch Sears ride off on his horse. Lewis went back inside to William Johnson, the keeper of Johnson Station, and they decided to hire a hitman named John A. Rogers to track down Sears. Rogers grabbed his trusty Colt revolver, hopped on the fastest horse that they had at Rogers Station, and headed out in pursuit of Sears. The pursuit ended about 25 miles away near Sweetwater Valley when Rogers came within distance of Sears. According to Rogers called out for Sears to stop, and Sears didn't. Sears ignored him. We don't know at this point if Sears ignored him, if Sears didn't hear him, or if Sears ran away, because at this point Rogers pulled out his Colt revolver, shot, and killed Sears. Rogers took Sears' body to Carson City and spoke with a judge. He told the judge his version of the events, because the judge could only get one side of the story, and also because the dead man was a horse thief. Rogers was free to go. Rogers decided to spend a little time in Carson City since he was there. He stayed a couple days, he was drinking, he was having some fun, and he was telling everybody about what he had just done. Being a hired gun, he could definitely handle himself, and he wasn't really worried about anybody coming after him over a horse thief. But when he found out that the man that he had killed was friends with the notorious John Daly, he knew he was in trouble. Hearing that John Daly was on his way to Carson City to find out what happened to his friend, Rogers quickly and quietly exited Carson City. But it wasn't long before this notorious gunman, John Daly, showed up at Johnson Station looking for Rogers. Johnson was there, Rogers wasn't, and Johnson told Daly that Rogers was gone and probably wasn't going to come back. This led to Daly staying in Aurora, trying to wait it out to see if Rogers came back so he could avenge his friend's death. John Daly's reputation preceded his arrival in Aurora. In his previous destinations of Sacramento, British Columbia, and Virginia City, he was well known for his gunfighting skills. It was well known upon his arrival that he had already killed 4 men in gunfights, and that number was probably closer to 10, and most of those probably weren't legal. Also, when Daly arrived in Aurora in 1963, he was only 25 years old, so he had gained this reputation very quickly. Daly also didn't show up alone. He showed up with some friends, or at least some acquaintances that had common interests. Their reputations landed them jobs almost immediately upon arrival. Of course, his past destinations, Sacramento, British Columbia, and Virginia City, he had always been in mining towns, and Aurora was no different. In these old mining towns, there was always a need for good gunmen, especially when one mining company is suing another mining company over disputed claims. That was the case in Aurora. The Pond Mining Company and the Real Del Monte were in a legal battle over claims. The Pond Mining Company hired the Daly gang, which consisted of Daly and his friends, to intimidate witnesses for the Del Monte Company and also intimidate executives. The Pond Mining Company paid the Daly gang very well for these services. Several executives for the Del Monte Company were scheduled to testify against the Pond Mining Company. The Daly gang intentionally spread word that these executives were marked men. H.T. Parlin of the Del Monte Company was scheduled to testify against the Pond Company. He was notified that he was marked for death by the Daly gang. He immediately sold off all his interests in the mining company and skipped town. Two other executives were notified that they were marked for death by the Daly gang, and they didn't skip town, but they fortified their homes and hired bodyguards to patrol at all hours, and they would never go in front of doors or windows because they thought someone might be outside ready to shoot them. The Daly gang, they didn't hide out at all. They were getting paid all of this money, so they were going out to all of the saloons, and they were gambling, and they were just living their best lives. That year, in the election of 1863 for city marshal, there were several well-to-do gentlemen of the area that were in a very, very tight race. John Daly decided to take advantage of this. He knew that if they were in such a tight race, that all of the votes would be split amongst these people, and he would be able to get one of his men in there and could possibly get a higher vote. That's exactly what happened. All of the respectable people in town split their votes amongst these gentlemen, and one of John Daly's men got all of the scourges of society to vote for him, and he became city marshal. His first duty as city marshal was to appoint John Daly and all of the Daly gang as deputies. So now not only were the executives and the people of the Del Monte Mining Company afraid of the Daly gang, but now they were basically the law in town. They were in charge of the town. The Esmeralda Star wrote, "No sooner had the marshal been sworn in than the worst villains that ever infested a civilized community were appointed policemen, and with but few exceptions, they were composed of as hard a set of criminals as ever went unhung." After this, any kind of crime in the town basically went unpunished. But then again, most of the crimes that happened were between members of the Daly gang and their rivals, or just members of the Daly gang. The first person that was killed after John Daly became deputy marshal was a member of the Daly gang named George Lloyd, and he was killed by John Daly. George Lloyd was actually the member of the Daly gang that was assigned to kill H.T. Parlin and ended up scaring him completely out of town. Even though George Lloyd was a member of the Daly gang, they didn't get along very well, and they had had a history of getting into fights, and one night at a saloon they got into an argument, and John Daly pulled his revolver, shot George Lloyd, and killed him on the spot. In December, the trial between the Pond Company and the Del Monte Company was moved to Carson City. John Daly, along with two of his associates, Three-Fingered Jack McDowell and S.B. Vance, accompanied him to Carson City. Upon arrival in Carson City, Daly, Three-Fingered Jack, and Vance ran into a man named McGee who had previously killed two members of the Daly gang. John Daly and his associates immediately decided that they were going to kill McGee. To decide who was going to kill him, they rolled dice. John Daly won and very happily accepted the duty. Daly found McGee in St. Nicholas Saloon on December 9th, 1863, and using the same gun that McGee had used to kill his two friends, Daly shot and killed McGee. Just 1 month later, on January 10th, Pond and Del Monte settled their suit, and it was time for everyone to head back to Aurora. When they got back to Aurora, they found that this was not the same place that they had left just a few months earlier. A man named Daniel H. Pine had been elected city marshal, and he had immediately fired all of the Daly gang members. Because Pond and Del Monte were no longer in this dispute, Pond no longer had any reason to employ the Daly gang, and now they had also lost their jobs as city marshal and city deputies. But before they packed up and left Aurora, John Daly still had one job left to do. He had to avenge the death of his friend James Sears. This was the whole reason that he came to Aurora in the first place, and after almost an entire year and all of this stuff going on, he still had not found John A. Rogers. Because he had not found Rogers, and because it looked like they needed to head out of town, he decided to take the next best man, and that was William Johnson. William Johnson was the keeper of Johnson Station, and William Johnson was a very well-liked, very well-respected man in the community. He was one of the regular people in town. He was one of the people that were going about their daily business that had nothing to do with the Daly gang. But on January 1st, 1864, William Johnson came into Aurora to sell some potatoes that he had been growing. After he sold his potatoes, he had some extra money, he went down to the saloon, and he had some drinks. One of the Daly gang members was there, spotted Johnson, and pulled up a chair right next to him. They started talking, they played some pool together, they gambled together, they became fast friends. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, Johnson and his new friend headed out, and they went over to Porter's Saloon on Antelope Street, where they met up with members of the Daly gang, including John Daly. The Daly gang then proceeded to sit and drink and be friends with a man that they knew that they were going to kill. So at 4:30 a.m., Johnson stumbled out into the street completely drunk just to come face to face with John Daly, Three Finger Jack, William Buckley, and James Masterson. Buckley took his revolver and smashed Johnson over the head. Johnson fell to the ground. As he was laying there, Daly walked up, pulled out his revolver, and shot him in the head. Just to make sure that it was finished, Buckley then reached down, grabbed a hold of Johnson's head, lifted it up, took out a knife, and slit his throat. The Daly gang left his body out there in the street for everyone to see. So when morning came and everyone came out into the streets, they were horrified by what they saw. The coroner took the body to his office and by noon started questioning suspects. S.B. Vance, one of the members of the Daly gang, was a man that was there to be questioned, and a man in the crowd named Watkins decided that he had had enough, pulled out his revolver, and shot Vance. He only wounded Vance, but Daly and Buckley were at a saloon nearby, heard the commotion, and they came charging out. They pulled their revolvers, and they were looking around the crowd trying to find out who shot Vance. While this was going on, the new marshal showed up and arrested Watkins for shooting Vance. By the next day, February 5th, the townspeople had had enough, and a safety committee of over 100 people gathered to take into custody the Daly gang. The safety committee, which was obviously a vigilante crew, took into custody Daly, Three Finger Jack, Buckley, and Masterson. After these 100 men seized the Daly gang, they built gallows and they were preparing to hang them. As they were standing there waiting to meet their end, Three Finger Jack pulled out a revolver, said "Goodbye, boys," pressed it to his chest, and pulled the trigger. The revolver misfired. It didn't go off. Three Finger Jack next said, "The son of a bitch pistol has fooled me." The safety committee then walked them in up to the gallows, wrapped the rope around their neck, and hanged all 4 members of the Daly gang. Aurora, Nevada is now a ghost town, but its memory lives on. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.